Senator Bennet, thank you for being here. We wanted to start with recreational marijuana. You know, it's legal in Colorado. It's probably going to be legal in several other states. So what are the ramifications at the federal level? And more importantly, what do you think the effect will be on our state?
I think it will be good for Colorado if California legalizes it in particular, because it will give us more folks on Capitol Hill who will argue that we need to allow, for example, the money that's generated as a result of marijuana businesses to be banked in banks. We've had a challenge with that when it's just Colorado or just a few states. I think now that the whole western side of America will have legalized marijuana, we'll have a very strong argument to make.
What has to happen first? Is it the banking or reclassifying where it falls with the DEA?
Well, I wish that we had reclassified it just now. The DEA just came out with a new regulation, still calling it a Class 1 narcotic. I thought that was unfortunate. They did make it easier for universities and others to do research on marijuana, which I think is important. I think we can get it done either way. So we're going to continue to focus on Treasury and try to get them to do the right thing.
What about the impact on Colorado, specifically businesses, tourism?
Well, I've never thought that we wanted Colorado to be a tourist destination for marijuana. We have lots of reasons why people want to come here, and they are coming here. It may be too late for some Airbnb businesses and other things, but I think it'll be good for Colorado to have other states legalize this and not have us just be out there on our own.
It's tough to be a destination spot when we have a troubled highway system. We know that a lot of
segue.
Thank you.
Yeah.
A lot of the funding for highways come from federal grants, minus what we have in Colorado right now, which is a struggle to pay for what we need, let alone additional needs like expanding I-70, for example. And I know CDOT just missed out on some federal funding for some grant that they applied for. What can we do federally to help what we have right here in Colorado?
So I was just up north of Fort Collins with some folks from the region up there celebrating a $25 million grant that they'd gotten from the federal government with Senator Gardner. He was there as well to begin the planning for the widening of I-25. And we're clearly underinvesting in our infrastructure. I've had a bill for the last several years that would, which is bipartisan, Roy Blunt from Missouri and 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, and an independent, that would basically repatriate the cash that's stuck overseas because of corporate earnings and bring it back to the United States and use some portion of that for infrastructure. My hope, given the emphasis that Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump have both put on infrastructure in the presidential campaign, my hope is that will be one of the very first things we'll work on when we get back. And I'll say this, even when I'm in the toughest town hall in Colorado and people are calling me names and saying, you know, they come because they don't like something that I've did, I say, well, I don't know about any of that. Maybe it's true, but here's what I do know. Because of something wrong in our politics in Washington, we don't have the decency right now to even maintain the assets and infrastructure, the roads and bridges that our parents and grandparents had the decency to build for us, much less build the infrastructure our kids are going to need to compete in the 21st century, and that's what we need to do.
Because you know that's a huge frustration for a lot of people, particularly here in Colorado. So as you travel our state, what's your biggest road construction headache that you encounter?
Oh, anytime I'm on I-25 or I-70 trying to get back into Denver from someplace, particularly on a Friday night, it is a nightmare. It's a nightmare.
And can you take that frustration to Congress?
Yeah, I do take it to Congress. It is an absolute nightmare, and it's gotten far worse in the last several years because we've grown. I mean, this is the downside of our success. We've attracted lots of people to the state, lots of millennials to the state, and with that comes lots of congestion. On the other hand, I'll say that the metro area, because of the investment we've made in fast tracks, the investment we've made in bus rapid transit, I think we've actually established a model for the rest of the country. When I stand behind Union Station, and I think to myself, you know, I look at that train station, which is sort of out of scale for Denver right now, and I imagine somebody standing there 50 years from now saying, I'm glad those people thought about us, which is, I think, the standard we ought to be applying to Congress. You know, are we thinking 50 years in the future, or are we thinking just between television commercials on the cable television?
Well, I think some would say that we are not thinking 50 years in the future when it comes to transportation here.
I would say that when it comes to transportation, higher education, immigration, a long list of things.
Let's talk about higher education since you bring that up.
Nope.
We have to.
I'm just kidding.
As a CU grads here, if I had to pay today what I paid when I graduated, we won't get into those years. I don't
100 years
I should
ago?
figure out how much it is. It's got to be at least 2 or 3 times as much.
Yeah.
I mean, the state can't sustain that.
Yeah.
So,
No, well, it's not just the state can't sustain it. It's deeply unfair to people that are going to college right now. There used to be a time in America and in Colorado up till about 1990 when taxpayers paid for college education and the student kicked in something to be able to get through. Today what we say to students is 2 things. 1, you're responsible to pay for your college education. And 2, because of a set of policies on the federal level and the state level that has resulted in the state not funding higher education anymore, what we've said to students is we're going to make it far more expensive today in real dollars, inflation-adjusted dollars, than when any of us went to college. So the people in college today are really being treated very unfairly from a generational point of view. It's unreasonable for people to graduate from a 4-year college and expect that they're going to spend the next 22 years of their lives paying back their loans. And that's the case for people going to college today in our state.
So where's the fix?
I think the fix is a combination of things. It's a combination of universities having to respond to incentives and to a market that no longer will tolerate annual increases like the increases that we've seen. And you see some schools doing that. Tim Foster, who's the head of Mesa State on the West Slope, he's making the case all over Colorado to students, come here, we'll graduate you with very little debt, and you're going to be able to make a real contribution to the economy and to the democracy at the outset. I think others will follow their lead. And I believe the federal government has a role to play here by taking the student loan program and saying, we're not just going to invest in every single increase that every college in America wants to make. We're going to reward colleges that are keeping their costs in line, and we're going to reward colleges that do a good job graduating people, you know, relatively on time.
Where do you stand on Common Core education?
I think it's very important for us to have a rigorous set of standards. And for my kids, I've got 3 children in the Denver public schools. I want them to know not just how they're doing compared to another kid in their classroom, and not just another kid in the district or even in our state. I want them to know how they're doing compared to a kid across the world, because they're going to be competing against those kids someday. And if we don't have a rigorous set of standards, in Colorado they're called the Colorado Assessment Standards, there's no way for my children to know that, and there's no way for parents of those children to know that. So when people come to me and they say they hate the Common Core or they hate Obamacare or whatever they say, I say as soon as you're willing to come here and have this conversation with a set of standards that are at least as rigorous as the Colorado Assessment Standards and the standards my kids are being taught to, I'm glad to have that conversation. But if this is just going to be a political discussion about why we hate so-called Obamacare or the Common Core, that's of no use to me as a parent of 3 children in the Denver public schools.
I got a taste of being a senator when I read the Blue Book, and this relates to Amendment 69 and universal health care for Colorado. The thing's like 8 pages long as it relates to the Cliff's Notes version.
That's short.
But that's the
like
Cliff's
800
Notes
pages
version.
long.
Give me the difference. Why is Obamacare good and Colorado Care finish and fill in the blank?
Well, first of all, I think we had serious problems in our healthcare system before Obamacare passed. We have serious issues in our healthcare system today. What I wish is that we would have, you know, politicians on both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats, working to solve their constituents' problems rather than create more problems. And what we've seen with, you know, efforts over and over again to repeal the healthcare bill instead of trying to work together. My hope after this election is over and the president is no longer the president, maybe we can get to the substance. On 69, I think that it's just too huge a change for our state in one fell swoop. I don't like the idea of putting our healthcare system into the Constitution in Colorado because it's hard to change things once it is in the Constitution. And I think we need more flexibility, especially when we're seeing in real time the kinds of expenses that people are having. I mean, if you draw a line from Frisco to Grand Junction and then north to Steamboat Springs, you've got that.
I'm picturing it.
That's among the most expensive places in America to buy health insurance because there's not any competition, and I also think we don't have the kind of transparency that we need. You know, my opponent in this race, and there are other folks that have said this too, is they say the government has no role to play in health care. And what I find interesting about that is I almost get no complaints from my constituents about Medicare. almost none, including doctors who are being paid reimbursed by Medicare. But my office, the phones light up from people who have paid their premiums. They say, Michael, I paid my premium to my private insurer, and then when I needed it, when I asked to be reimbursed because we had something happen in the family, they just keep me on the phone as long as possible, in effect denying my claim just because they can outlast me. And so these are the challenges that we face, and I don't think this should be a partisan battle. I think there are bipartisan approaches. I've got bills with people like Rob Portman, a Republican from Ohio, that would help move us forward in terms of quality and better care. And I think the people at home just want us to depoliticize this issue.
So just to be clear, on 69, you're a no.
I don't support it. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, let's talk about immigration for a moment. That's obviously a big topic in this presidential race. Talk about how you would change immigration policies.
Well, I can tell you exactly how I would, because I was part of the Gang of Eight that negotiated the immigration bill in the Senate. 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans who sat together for 8 months to negotiate a bill that passed with 68 votes in the Senate. That's hard to do. That's a big bipartisan majority in the Senate. The House never has even taken up that bill. And specifically, what did that bill do? It's the only bill that's passed either House of Congress that has real border security in it. It added 21,000 agents to our border. It created internal security in this country so that small businesses no longer have to be the INS. That work is done for them. It created a pathway to citizenship for the 11 million people that are here that are undocumented. It passed the most useful DREAM Act that has ever passed the United States Senate. And these were provisions that I negotiated with Marco Rubio and Orrin Hatch and Dianne Feinstein, the ag jobs provision of the bill. It created an entirely new way of dealing with our agriculture sector, which is so important to the state of Colorado and to the country. So it did many more things than that. It was a good piece of work, and I think the House should take it up. I really do. And they would pass it if they did. And you mentioned the rhetoric in the presidential campaign. I just want to say a word about that. There are people all over this state who are concerned that as a result of this rhetoric, their families are going to be deported, their loved ones are going to be deported. And I don't see why that does anybody any good in the state of Colorado or the country. I've been very disappointed by that rhetoric, especially when we have the example of that Senate immigration bill that we passed. And you know, sometimes people say to me, this will surprise you, that say to me, you guys are terrible, you deserve your 9% approval rating, there's no leadership in Washington, D.C. And what I say to them every time, and that's all over the state and all over the country, I say, I've seen the level of leadership we've needed. And it was the leadership provided by John McCain, Jeff Flake, Marco Rubio, and Lindsey Graham, the four Republicans who sat in that room negotiating the immigration bill for 8 months, knowing exactly what the base of their party would say about them being there, but doing it because it was the right thing to do for their country and the right thing to do for their party in that order. We don't see enough of that in D.C.
No wall in that plan, huh?
There is no wall in that plan. And, you know, I would recommend to Mr. Trump that he take a tour of the southern border in Arizona with John McCain in a Black Hawk helicopter, which I have. And then you'd see how impractical his suggestion is. There are ways because of the technologies we've developed in Iraq and Afghanistan, there are ways for us to monitor every single inch of that border and see who's coming across and who needs to go back. Building a wall is preposterous.
This would be great debate material. There's only one U.S. Senate televised debate, and it's not on this station right now. And that's the reasons for that could be a whole other show. We had Dick Wadhams on recently, who said he respected you and then called both you and Darrell Glenn out saying you're failing Colorado voters and you've fallen down on your responsibility. Why are you or are you not doing that?
I don't understand
Colorado.
why
are you
I was failing my responsibility.
By not having multiple televised debates?
Well, my opponent unilaterally pulled out of your debate and the Denver Post debate. The Denver Post is it's the paper of record in the state of Colorado, and that was his choice. That's what he decided to do. Ordinarily, what I'd expect is to have a negotiation with the other campaign about a series of debates. That's, for whatever reason, that hasn't been the case. So we're doing the debate we did debate at Club 20. We're doing the debate Channel 9 next week, which I'm looking forward to. And we've got a bunch of forums that we've been doing as well. Colorado Oil and Gas Forum, the Water Congress, the Denver Chamber of Commerce. So there'll be plenty of opportunities for people to hear what we've got to say. I actually, myself, well, I wish that he hadn't turned down your debate.
Well, when you're looking at presidential debates, and we're talking Super Bowl numbers in that case, I mean, people do want to see you debate. They want to see these things
Well, they're
happen.
getting the chance to do it next week, next Tuesday.
One and only. Okay. What is it about you that voters don't know that you would like for them to know?
I think the thing that maybe people don't know is that I have been, I think people do know that I work in a bipartisan way with Republicans and Democrats to get things done for Colorado. I hope they also know that I've spent a lot of the last 7 years traveling all over the state of Colorado, having meetings in cities and towns and rural parts of the state on things like the Farm Bill, on things like immigration, trying to create a connection between Colorado and what's going on in D.C. One of the things that I am most worried about is that I think Washington, in so many ways, has decoupled from the priorities of people living in Colorado and across the country, for that matter. And it's the reason why I've tried to work so hard to thread those two things together. So when you talk about the immigration bill, or I talked about that bill, that work started not in Washington for me, but in Colorado, or the work to reform the Food and Drug Administration so that more drugs would be approved more quickly. That work started here with people that were developing new drugs for people. And certainly the work that I did on the Elementary and Secondary School Act. I mean, a lot of that was based on my time as a superintendent of schools, but a lot of it also was the result of time I've spent in schools and classrooms all over the state on those many Fridays when I get home.
Now, we want to give you a moment to give a closing, but I'd be remiss to ask you quickly about the TransPacific Partnership. It's something that, no matter which candidate wins, could be dead on arrival, but how does this agreement of 12 Asian nations, how would it help Colorado in any way? In what form should that look like?
Well, it could stand, first of all, I think it probably is dead on arrival right now. One of the things I'm really concerned about with this presidential campaign is that now when you listen to people, it's not that the trade agreement is bad, it's that trade is bad. That is a bad position for the United States, and it's a bad position for Colorado. And so what I hope is that at some point we're able to resurrect a version of what we have, because I don't want to cede our leadership in the economies that we're talking about in this agreement to China, which would happen. Either we set the rules of the road with our trading partners, or China's going to set the rules of the road with the trading partners. Much better for us to do it. You asked specifically, how would Colorado benefit? Hugely. If we were able to bring the tariffs down, that which is basically a tax that other countries put on our agricultural products. We have a very hard time selling our dairy products and our wheat products and beef products overseas because of those tariffs. And this agreement would bring those tariffs down and open up those markets for Colorado agriculture, which is where most of our growth is going to come in that sector of our state's economy.
Senator Bennet, you have a couple minutes now to talk directly to the voter without us asking you a question, and you can do so right at that camera right there.
Okay. Well, thanks so much for watching tonight. It's been a great privilege to represent a state that's a third Democratic, a third Independent, and a third Republican at a time when our politics is so broken and it seems like nobody can work with the other side. I've spent the 7 years doing exactly the opposite, working with all of you to develop ideas around immigration, around the reform of our Food and Drug Administration, around education, around our Farm Bill, and then gone back to Washington to work with Republicans and Democrats together to make sure that we can pass legislation that will help our families at home. That's what I think the standard ought to be for somebody working in one of these jobs. As I mentioned earlier today, that I think there ought to be a standard where politicians are thinking 50 years in advance rather than just 10 minutes in advance. And if we did that, thought about the next generation and the generation after that, we'd be more likely to do the right thing than the wrong thing. My opponent in this race has a very different view. He says the problem with Washington is that Republicans have been too conciliatory, that they've cooperated too much. He said that he wouldn't support, for example, Mitch McConnell to be the leader of the Republican Party because he conspired with President Obama against the country. I completely disagree with that view. As a friend of mine has said in Washington, another senator if all you want to do is give speeches and you can't compromise, you might as well stay at home and be on the radio. There's no reason for you to come to Washington to be a legislator. I think my office has been more successful at navigating the dysfunction in Washington than almost any office, probably any office in Washington, D.C. The reason I'd like to have the chance to go back is to take that track record and help lead us out of the dysfunction that we have. I know it's become fashionable to degrade the institutions, democratic institutions that so many generations of Americans have built before us, but I think our kids and our grandkids are expecting us to do what people have done since the founding of this country, which is provide more opportunity, not less, to the people that are coming after us. Thank you for the chance to be your senator, and I'm asking for your vote.